there may have been a time when we felt that we could coast along under the umbrella of NATO without doing very much, or in NORAD without doing very much. The Americans would cover up for us, and that would be okay. I don't think that's in the cards in any way. I don't think the Americans will put up with that. I don't believe our allies in Europe will put up with it. And I think it's a reality that we're going to have to become, our defense capacity is going to have to become more robust.
Welcome to another installment in the CDA Institute's Expert Series. I'm your host, Josh Malm, Digital Content Manager for the CDA Institute. We recently sat down with Canadian Ambassador and Permanent Representative to the United Nations, the Honorable Bob Rae. We spoke about the challenges successive crises, such as the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, and the invasion of Ukraine have posed to the UN, the consequences of the war on Putin's future strategic calculations and for the global economy, the importance of NATO resolve in the face of rising authoritarianism, and what Beijing has likely taken away from the events of the past 4 months. Ambassador Rae, it is a privilege to host you today. Thank you for taking some time to meet with the CDA Institute. To start off this discussion, what impact has the invasion of Ukraine had on the rules-based international order, especially considering the events preceding it, like the pandemic and the increasing impacts of global climate change? I'm wondering if you can get into how the UN is grappling with these successive crises and what challenges they've posed.
Well, I think the impact is huge, both in terms of values, the rule of law, and the effect on the institution of the United Nations. But I think ultimately, more importantly, or certainly as important, has been the global impact because of the economic consequences of the conflict. And that, I think, is going to have I would describe it as more of a tsunami effect than a ripple effect. I think sometimes we underestimate the seriousness of the current crisis on food prices and food security, which is simply enormous. So we take those three things together. Let me just very briefly. First of all, aggression is a cardinal sin in the world of international law. It's in the Charter. It's clearly set out in the Charter. It's set out in every principle of international law. States don't attack other states, and if they do, it's a declaration of, effectively a declaration of war. Although increasingly states don't call it that, they'll say it's something else. And of course, notoriously, President Putin describes it as a special military operation, but it's not. It's an act of aggression. It's an aggressive attack. And then you have all the consequent abuses: the abuse against civilians, the abuse against international humanitarian law, the question of the Statute of Rome, and all of the crimes against humanity, which are listed there, which are being investigated by the prosecutor, and the issue of genocide, which is being taken by Ukraine into the International Court of Justice. So the world of international law has been totally upended by this. But I think equally important to that, on the first point, is the issue of, well, what do we do about it? And I think it's been one of the frustrations of the world to have watched the UN Security Council, having any commentary on this vetoed by the aggressor, who's also a permanent member of the UN. So I think it's a very, very significant impact on the institution. I mentioned the Security Council. I think it's, in some ways, it's revealed the Security Council in all of its weaknesses and the staleness of its debates, and it's frankly forced the General Assembly to move up and lift up and do more. And I think the Secretary General is also doing more, because everybody used to think that, well, we can't do much without the Security Council. The reality is we have to do everything without the Security Council. And that's becoming increasingly clear to all of us. And on the third, I think in time people will understand just how dramatic the economic impacts are, in addition to the COVID and climate change disruptions, which we're dealing with. This, of all the global conflicts at the moment, this is the one that has the most impact on the whole global economic system and financial system and everything else.
How did we get to this point collectively where Putin presumably felt empowered enough to invade Ukraine? Do you think we maybe could have been tougher on Putin earlier on?
I think there's no question that we underestimated him, and not just underestimated him, misunderstood the nature of the power that he was accruing to himself and the full meaning of his arrival, of his ideology, his personal ideology and intention when he came into power in after Yeltsin. And I think there was a lot of people weren't reading what he was saying, or people weren't paying attention to it, or people weren't watching what he was saying. He was opposed to, as a former KGB agent, and a militant in the Russian Communist Party, and people underestimated. He didn't believe in what Gorbachev was doing. He didn't support what Yeltsin did. He didn't support the breakup of the Russian Empire. He was opposed to all that. He thought it was a terrible thing. And it's clear that when he came into power, his determination was to change things, to change Russia's position in the world, and to say, no, we can't go on like this. And so he's accrued a incredible amount of personal power to himself, making himself basically essentially president for life, as President Xi has done in China. And we need to understand the meaning of this kind of autocracy, what it does to the world order, what it does to the people of Russia. And I think there's just been a lot of wishful thinking that somehow, well, it's just a matter of a few border messes in Georgia, and yeah, he had to deal with the Chechens. Yeah, that's, but I mean, he obliterated the opposition. He murdered thousands of people in the course of his consolidation of power. He's a brutal dictator. And I don't say these things rhetorically. I just think we need to understand the nature of what we're up against. And so in the course of that, I think we underestimated him. But having said that, I think it would be a mistake to blame ourselves, blame the aggressor. He's responsible for this. I mean, if we had done it earlier, I don't think we would have had the kind of support in NATO or elsewhere to do more than what was done. What was done in response to Crimea is what the international community was prepared to do. Should the whole community have been prepared to do more? Obviously, but they didn't, and they weren't. You wouldn't have got the Germans and the French and others to move. You wouldn't have been able to mobilize NATO. And I think that's what's happened in Ukraine has finally, I think, galvanized most of NATO, most of the Western countries, to understand what the nature of the threat and the nature of how he's manifesting his power. But frankly, when you read what people say on a daily basis, sometimes you wonder whether enough people fully understand the nature of what's taking place. And I think there's still some wishful thinking. I mean, Henry Kissinger and other people's comments, just wishful thinking to say, maybe if we treated this dictator more kindly, he might respond differently. And I don't agree with that approach. I'm very much opposed to it.
Do you think that the consequences of the war may force Putin to change his calculations at some point? What kind of strategic situation could Putin be facing if he's still in power after the war ends?
I actually don't think that Putin's strategy has changed that much. I don't think his strategy has changed. I think his tactics have changed. I think he faced an incredibly resilient Ukrainian army and an incredibly effective response to his ineffective attack, particularly from the north, but even in some of the dispute in the south and the east. But I don't think his overall strategy, what's his goal? His goal is to destroy Ukraine, to undermine the Ukrainian economy every way that he can, to obliterate its infrastructure, to attack its language and its culture. I mean, he may have limited geographic objectives, maybe geographically more refined. He wants to steal a whole bunch of territory. He wants to make permanent his conquest of Crimea, and he wants to make sure that there's a land link between Crimea and all the way across to the east, and then he wants to carry around to the north. But and I don't think his geographic ambitions are limited yet. I don't think he feels he's achieved them. So I think that he feels he has to go further. And what he wants to do there is steal land. But then what's left of Ukraine? What is Ukraine? What he thinks is, well, that's now Ukraine. He doesn't want that to go anywhere. They may not even get access to, if he gets his way, they won't get access to the sea, which is critical for their economy. And ultimately, he wants to obliterate their government and have a weakened vassal state that he'll then be able to dictate, what to do, sort of like Vichy France or something like that. I mean, that's clearly what he's intending, and he wants to be able to control the school curricula. He wants to control, the position of the Russian language everywhere in Ukraine. He wants to deny the integrity of Ukraine as a nation, as a state, as a culture, and as a people. And in my book, that's genocide. And I think that's where we can't afford any weakness in how we respond to that. That is just not possible to take. Now, what happens to him if he doesn't achieve this, or if the military setback is greater because of tactical failures on his part? It could well be very disruptive in Russia. And of course, strategically, we have to be thinking about that. But I think it's also important and plan. I wouldn't say plan, but we have to be aware of what those possibilities might be. And we also have to accept the fact that in many instances, what replaces a dictator is often no better than the dictator, and sometimes even worse. I mean, in terms of what could emerge. We also need to understand that a great many members of the Russian middle class and intellectuals have left the country. It's been not a noted phenomenon. The number of people who've gotten out of Russia and have no intention of going back until there's dramatic change, because they find the place unlivable, and they've lost a huge amount of talent out of that country.
As a middle power, how can Canada optimize its support of Ukraine? What strengths can we leverage efficiently to aid Ukraine, especially given some of our other commitments?
There may have been a time when we felt that we could coast along under the umbrella of NATO without doing very much, or in NORAD without doing very much. The Americans would cover up for us, and that would be okay. I don't think that's in the cards in any way. I don't think the Americans will put up with that. I don't believe our allies in Europe will put up with it. And I think it's a reality that we're going to have to become, our defense capacity is going to have to become more robust. I think our diplomatic capacity has to be more robust, and I think our development capacity has to be more robust. I believe that if you want soft power, you need hard power, and you need to show that you're willing to contribute to the global effort. And frankly, at our best, we've always done that, and I don't believe we can do less now. I think it's important for us to understand these things all go together, and if we don't step up in a substantive way, then we can talk about our convening power and all the other kinds of things we might think all we want. But in order to be effective, you got to say, this is what I'm bringing to the table. This is what I'm prepared to do. And there are lots of countries out there that think they have convening power, but they don't convene anything because they don't bring anything to the table. And so you've got to have something substantive to bring that will make a difference. And that requires, I think, continuing on the path that I think we're now on. I think we are on this path to a more productive and engaged role on a number of fronts. But the fact is that we're in a situation of a country of almost 40 million people, where geographically huge, We're Pacific as well as Atlantic and Arctic, huge neighbor with the United States. We're not going to, we're challenged because the Australians, for example, can say, well, we don't really have a Latin American policy, or we don't need a, they can look around the world and say, well, we can do things, focus on our region. Our region is global. Our reach is global. And I think the recent conflict in Europe has demonstrated that people expect Canada to play a role in Europe. They don't want us to go away. They want us to be constructive partners. And that includes all the elements: political, legal, justice, accountability, human rights, go down the list. And so this puts, if you like, it puts pressure on us to do more. But frankly, when you look at budgets, doesn't necessarily match that. So we need to have the budgets that match our ambition and frankly, and our rhetoric. But I think more and more, all these things have to be brought into the reality of what we're doing. And that's the challenge that we now face.
I have one more question for you, Ambassador Ray. China is no doubt observing events unfold in Ukraine and the Western response. What do you think Beijing has learned or maybe taken away from the past 3 or 4 months?
China is interesting. I mean, it's a complicated country. It has global ambitions. It likes to see itself as a leader of the developing world, as they continue to say. They definitely have global reach and a huge, massive economy. So they're an autocracy, and they believe profoundly in their system versus our system. I think that they will continue to be very, very careful and cautious in what they do, but I have no doubt that ultimately their interests are, unfortunately, aligned with the other autocrats. However, beyond that interest, self-interest always prevails. So I think that the Chinese economy is not doing well, like anybody else's economy is not doing particularly well. They're going to be clearly preoccupied with the impact that has. There's lots of internal tensions and challenges within China that have been kind of covered over by growth of 8-10% over the last several years. But just as a booming economy covers a lot of cracks, a troubled economy reveals a lot of divisions and fissures and problems. And I think we're seeing that internally. That could have a number of different effects. It could drive President Xi to look for a war or a conflict or some expression of greater nationalism. I mean, stranger things have happened. So we have to be aware of that. And I think that's something everybody is aware of. And but I also think China, I think, will have observed that the combined will of Europe and the United States and Canada and the allies, if you like, is quite strong. And I think President Biden made that clear last week in China, perhaps a little more clear than some people wanted him to, but personally, I'm not unhappy with what he said. I think that it's important to be clear. We've had enough ambiguity to last a lifetime, in my opinion. But I think we do need to understand that Taiwan is important, an important symbol of a real place with a real government and a real economy and a real interest. And you can't allow that to be obliterated, whether they're technically a member of the United Nations or not. I think we have to be, we can't be buffaloed continually by these two countries saying, well, we get our way or we'll put our finger on the nuclear button. We have to be prepared to defend what we believe in, and we have to understand that all the escalation at the moment is coming from the other side. It's not coming from us.